We'll be talking about social interactionist theories during this chapter. These theories all derive their explanations from the give and take that continuously occurs between social groups and individuals in society. These theories include labeling theory, symbolic interactionist theory, and conflict theory. We'll also, at the end of the chapter, consider a relatively new way of dealing with delinquency called restorative justice, or sometimes peacemaking. We start our chapter considering labeling theory. During the 1960s and the 1970s, the labeling perspective was one that was very influential in delinquency studies and research. Labeling theory is sometimes known as the interactional theory of deviance, or the social reaction perspective, because it's based on the idea that society creates deviance by labeling those that are apprehended as different from the other individuals, when in reality they are different only because they have been tagged with a deviant label. Several very influential sociological theorists, Frank Tannenbaum, Edwin Lemert, and Howard Becker, all were very strong proponents of the labeling perspective, and all these theorists focused on how someone's self-concept could be changed through the reaction of others. Tannenbaum was one of the first theorists to develop the concept of labeling. In a 1938 publication on crime in the community, Tannenbaum examined the process by which a juvenile came to the attention of the authorities and was labeled as different from other juveniles. Tannenbaum called this process the dramatization of evil. Attempting to escape the society that created this negative label, the youth would then associate more often with other delinquents. Tannenbaum proposed that the less that evil was dramatized, the less likely youth are to become involved in deviant careers. Edwin Lemert developed the notion of primary and secondary deviance. Lemert was developing his theories about the same time that Sean McKay and Sutherland were developing their theories. Lemert's theory stood in stark contrast to the other theorists of his time. Lemert focused his research and theories on the interaction between social control agents and rule violators, as well as how certain behaviors came to be labeled as criminal, delinquent, or deviant. According to Lemert, the primary deviation consisted of the deviant's behavior, and secondary deviation was society's response to the initial behavior. The social reaction to the deviant, Lemert would say, forces a change in status or role. That is, society's reaction to the deviant person resulted in a transformation of the person's identity. The social reaction to the deviant person, whether it's something very minor like a disapproving glance or a full-blown stigmatization, is critical in understanding the eventual commitment of that person to a deviant life. The concept of a social reaction is a general term that summarizes both the moral indignation of others and the action that is directed at its control. Social reaction refers to the ability of control agents to impose constraints on the deviant person. These can include not just individual reactions to a person, but also treatment, corrections, and punishment. Howard Becker was another labeling theorist, and he was writing shortly after Lemert developed his ideas. He developed the idea of someone being labeled as an outsider, and the process of being labeled created the outsider. Becker argued that once a person is caught and labeled, that person becomes the outsider. With this new social status, there also comes changes in that person's self-image and their public identity. Now, there's a long history of discussion and arguments about whether the labeling that occurs in the formal process of the juvenile justice system is what influences the secondary responses of continued delinquent acts. Some theorists argue that most delinquent acts are minor and do not warrant a response, but that once the youth are arrested and brought before the juvenile courts, that they are stereotyped as being different. Once they acquire this label, they get more attention from authorities and then become more likely to get processed deeper into the juvenile justice system, if there is further contact. We'll talk about this idea of radical non-intervention, proposed by Edwin Scher, in a few slides. But for now, let's review at least the main theories we've discussed so far. This slide helps you see at a glance the differences in the main premises underlying Tannenbaum, Lemaitre, Becker, Scher, and also Triplett and Jojora, who expanded more recently on the ideas of labeling theory. Triplett and Jojora separated labeling into formal and informal labels. Formal labels would be those that are imposed by the agents in the juvenile justice system, and informal labels are those that are created by parents, neighbors, and friends. As you can see, all of these theorists are criticized because they do not adequately consider the secondary deviation, meaning the later acts, of the youth. What they all have in common is how others react to the youth, which of course is why they are all considered social interaction theories.